You ready?
So just holler at me when you want me to change slides, okay? All right, you can just say change slide or point to me or whatever.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. For those of you that don't know, my name is Liz Taylor. I'm the office coordinator at Sage, and again, welcome. Just a couple little housekeeping items. There are restrooms through the door into the office area. Men's and women's are over there. There's a drinking fountain. After this, we'll have our lunch part of our lunch and learn, and that's downstairs. There's an elevator out here, or if you're feeling a little more energetic, there's stairs at the end of the hall. So after we're finished, just make your way on down to the lunch. I think you're really going to like, oh.
What do we do next month?
I'll announce that at the lunch downstairs, but it is in the bulletin or the newsletter. There's some newsletters out on the sign-in table if you didn't receive one or you're brand new. Excuse me. So it's the library. There is a sign-in sheet, so if you haven't signed in, please do. So our speaker today is Betsy Alexander. She is a master gardener, and she has been a master gardener since 2005, which is a long time. So she is an expert on this topic. Please give her a big hand, and we appreciate you coming out. Would you rather use this?
Okay, so first thing, talking about chocolate. Piece of chocolate. You want to take one and pass it. If that's allowed on your diet, some people it's too much fatty stuff. I have to kind of watch that. Some people had a question about is there too much caffeine in that? And there's a slide that will come up and talk about that. So let's talk about chocolate. So, title of the program, Chocolate, a Gift from the Rainforest. Go ahead. You want to change it? So, 3 broad sections to the program. It's going to be a bit of history. It's going to be something about how chocolate is grown and processed. Is this better? Everybody here, back row? Okay. And for those of you into gardening, we talk about garden plants, so-called chocolate plants, not actually chocolate-producing plants, but have chocolate in their name due to the foliage color or the flower color. Okay, slide. When we talk about the history of chocolate, we're talking about the area of Central America, partially South America, the northwestern corner of South America. Okay, slide. Going to have to do some time travel. We're going to go back thousands and thousands of years. Okay, slide. Going to go way back to 4,500. Am I causing that ringing? Am I better? It's because of that. Well, let me move there. Let me switch. Okay, is that better? Whoop. Okay, so we'll go with this. We're going to travel back thousands and thousands of years. We could. Okay, next slide. When we talk about the early history of chocolate, we're talking about something called the primary or pristine civilizations, the very first civilizations in an area. We tend to think of this all being in the Middle East, Mesopotamia. We forget that there are two locations here in the Western Hemisphere, in Central America and in South America. Next slide. So the very first chocolate drink comes from this civilization. I'll put my glasses on here so I can read. Roughly 4,000 BC. Slide. This is an area in the Andes. On your the picture there, if you see the yellow star, that's where this civilization, the remains of it are found, the archaeological expeditions. Okay, slide. These are just some of the, excuse me, things that have been found. Interestingly, their construction has this interesting, reminds me of a shell-shaped kind of spiral foundation to things. They also, in their excavation, found remnants of that very pretty reddish-orange spiky shell, which is important in our journey, and those pottery vessels. This slide. They also find evidence of maize or corn, chilies. I can't read my writing from there, but anyway, those pottery pieces, some of them intact vessels, when they tested the contents of what was in there, they found something called theobromine. Slide. What is theobromine? It's a unique chemical. You find that, and it indicates there has been chocolate present. Theobromine is a chemical from chocolate itself. Next slide. So we're going to travel from that first early spot. We're going to go north up to what is now Honduras. Next slide. And again, they find pottery pieces, some intact pieces of pottery, test them, and again, the chemical they find is theobromine. So some kind of a mixture with the cacao or chocolate beans was in that pot. Next slide. We're going to come up even further now to Central America. And in these excavations that they do there, they find pottery pieces, test those pottery pieces again. Next slide. They come up with a surprise that they had not expected. Up until this point, they thought the earliest use of chocolate went back to the Mayas. This testing shows that it was hundreds and hundreds of years earlier. From a second site, 4 years later, they find more pottery pieces, test them again, and it confirms what the first testing showed, that this is chocolate that was being used in this area. So I have a couple of mysteries. Slide. First one is, how in the world did that chocolate get from where it was first found and dated in that South American civilization? And we find it then going up north, find it in Honduras, find it in Central America. How did that happen? Well, those people that lived in the coastal area along the coast of South America were travelers, explorers, I guess, if you will. And they trade things that they have with the people that they're encountering. Next slide. One of the things that they have are those pretty spiky red-orange shells. What they don't have is what the people in those inland areas have, are the chocolate pods. And people are eating that fleshy part, and they're processing it into a chocolate drink. Next slide. Second mystery, which is maybe a little harder to figure out, is how do we go from that raw chocolate, it's in a pod, I have a couple of them, looks like this, into a food, if you will. And you can kind of imagine if you're walking through that hot, humid jungle and you come across one of those pods, and maybe it's already been chewed open, and you get curious. So you taste that inner stuff, that white, pulpy stuff. Tastes good. It's sweet, it's juicy, tastes kind of a citrus flavor to it. So it's easy to take that off, kind of suck it off, and eat that. Then you get to that seed inside. The seed looks like an almond. You bite into that seed, and it is nasty. Nasty as in unpleasant. Spit it out, get it out of my mouth. So how in the world do they make that jump from a nasty seed to roasting it, grinding it, and making kind of a drink, sort of a gruel or a mushy dish out of it? Can't answer that really. Next slide. So we're going to take a look here, starting in this Central American area. Up there, if you can see, it's kind of faint on that slide, in the rectangle, this Olmec culture. It's often referred to as the mother culture of Mexico. These people came way before the Mayans. The rough dates there, 1500 to 450 BCE. And it's a very, what word do I want? Advanced civilization. They have a means of writing. They have built pyramids, stone buildings. They have an accurate calendar. And they are processing the chocolate into a food. Next slide. This is what one of those structures looks like, the ruins that have been excavated. Next slide. They were very talented engineers. They were also skilled artisans. You find pieces like that carving. You find these other pieces on the left there, that green figure. It's small, probably about this tall, polished, pretty green color. The piece that's, I guess, possibly more amazing is the one on the right, that huge carved stone head. Slide. That has been, yeah, there we go. It's tall, it's heavy, and it's made from a stone that is not naturally in this area. And it has been carved by hand. That stone has been moved to this area. They don't have horses, they don't have mules, and curiously enough, they never invented the wheel. So it took some work to get this piece of stone where they wanted it. Slide. Subject unknown. They think it was probably some, whether it was a ruler, noble person, soldier, whatever, something that they chose to do all that work to make that carving. These are some other pieces of the artwork that they did. Quite interesting and quite, I mean, looks like anything that you would find in a shop or an artisan doing today. I thought that one on the upper left reminded me a lot of what you see from Egypt at this time, but a civilization thousands and thousands of miles away. Also find carvings like this. That's a jaguar, referred to as, instead of a werewolf, it's a were-jaguar. Not quite sure what the importance of that was to them, but enough to make that carving. Next. So they were also growing this cacao, is the botanical name for the chocolate plant, is Theobroma cacao. So they are growing this as a domestic plant. In other words, they have brought it from out in the woods, in the wild, and they're growing it in their villages. Slide. And they're processing it. Some of the processing still happens like this today. It's a lot by hand. They grind the seeds, catch that pulverized piece, and mold it into circular pieces kind of about the size of a ping pong ball maybe. And then if you're doing the cooking with it, you grate that or slice that. This is a special bowl that was used for that chocolate preparation. Next slide. So the Olmec civilization sort of loses its dominance, and they are succeeded by the Maya civilization roughly about 300 BCE. And they build on some of these things that the Olmecs have. They continue those pyramid building. They refine the calendar to make it one of the most accurate in that ancient world. And it's surprisingly enough, because again, you tend to think of all that happening in the Middle East. And actually here in the Western Hemisphere is a civilization doing the same thing. The Maya civilization, let's see, what have I skipped here? They are also processing the chocolate bean. Next slide. And they are adding things to it that they have available to them. They have the spices, they have the vanilla bean, cinnamon, and the agave plant. This is the agave syrup to sweeten. And they add some things to it that they have available to them. That first one there is a plant that gave it kind of a spicy taste, and the second one thickened it. Next slide. This is a tile from one of the excavations and showing there the stylized chocolate tree with the pods coming off, that it was important to their religion. Again, it was part of their creation story, how it was brought down to earth. Let's see, where's the next slide? Have I got? Oop. They have a specific god dedicated to chocolate. Got all those pods popping out, and they have that celebration in what is, for us is April. That's the hieroglyphic for chocolate. And, excuse me, tickle in my throat. I guess it's a different kind of thing. The drink was not so much for the everyday guy in the street. It was more for the the soldiers, the royalty, the rulers, their over-the-road runners. Slide. I got a drink of water here. This is a statue of one of the rulers who chose to be portrayed holding chocolate pods in each hand. So the next civilization that gains prominence here are the Aztecs. Next slide. If you kind of have a notion what they were all about, they were very warlike people. It was part of their religion, part of their thinking process that some of these practices were done. Slide. Very warlike, but they did have an educational system for their kids, and they also were processing chocolate into a food or a drink, kind of a gruel-like stuff. Slide. Part of their religious doctrine, I guess if you will, is that their god Quetzalcoatl brought the chocolate tree down to them from paradise. They used the seeds, the size of an almond. Let's see, let me show you here. Go back to my microphone. They have found counterfeit beans. They use the dried beans, besides as food product, as a means of exchange, as money, and a set exchange system for it. Next slide. So They prefer to drink their chocolate cold, supposedly. I'm not quite sure how you figure that out from your archaeological expeditions. And of course, they add things to it that they have available to them. The spices, the vanilla. Slide. They too add things to it to change the taste and to spice it up. That's a quote there, if you can read it from the back. One of the Spanish friars wrote that comment about what that plant tasted like, what it added to the chocolate. Next slide. So if you're, did the other side get it? Did it get over? Oh, okay, all right. I have some water, thank you. I wish that would help. Blame it on the pollen and the allergies. No, that's right. That might not. Ooh. So if you have to prepare this chocolate, you don't have a blender sitting on your countertop. How in the world do you go about preparing it? Well, you can see, as the picture shows you there, they poured it back and forth from up here to the pot, back and forth, and the fat from that chocolate made it kind of foam up. And the gritty pieces fall to the bottom of the pot eventually. And as you can imagine, if you're grinding that on a stone piece with a stone roller, you get a lot of that gritty stuff included in there. So the best part of it is the frothy top of that. And again, it's like a gruel. The Aztec people were extremely good herbalists. Unfortunately, a lot of their knowledge is lost because in that part of the world with that humidity, things don't preserve well, which is unfortunate for us. But they did use the cacao, the cocoa, to treat a number of things, everything from TB to gout to kidney stones. Slide. So what happens next? Very unfortunate for these native people. Thank you. Oops, let's go back one. The Spanish arrive. They bring their horses with them, their armor, their weapons. But what's the very, very worst thing they bring with them? Yeah, they're European diseases that these native people have absolutely no resistance to. In the process of meeting these native people and really being welcomed by them, unfortunately, the Spaniards see how important that almond bean is to these people, and they enjoy the drink. So it's taken back to Spain. They add sugar, slide. They add sugar to this. They still process it the same way. And the other thing they create for this, making the chocolate, is this mixing stick, I guess you could call it, that they include in the chocolate pots. And this becomes a very social kind of event. Next slide. For this chocolate service. Excuse me. So to kind of recap a comic strip here of what's happened up until this point, the Spanish keep this kind of a secret for quite a long while, and it gets out when one of the Spanish princesses marries into the French court, and she takes her chocolate service with her. And the secret then is out. And by 1600, the rest of Europe has learned about chocolate and about making chocolate. 1700s, the English try adding milk to this. Doesn't work real well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. 1765, there is now chocolate here in the United States. Year 2000, I don't know if you can read that small print. It says that the average American eats 12 pounds of chocolate a year. So, what is it about chocolate? We have been eating this for thousands, literally thousands and thousands of years. It's kind of a chemical stew, if you will. All kinds of things to make you feel better, kind of alert, give you some energy. Most recently, it has been the antioxidants in the dark chocolate that there has been publicity about. Slide. Not a whole lot of caffeine in this, if you can read that. An ounce of dark chocolate has 18 milligrams of caffeine. An ounce is about a third of a bar, about that size. A cup of coffee has 65 to 110 milligrams, so it's not as much as coffee. And in talking about the dark chocolate, you see things like this from Dr. Oz that makes it seem like a superfood. Next slide. Oh, you want it back? They want this previous. There you go. Okay. I don't know in the back. Can you read that? Yep. That's what it says. Next slide. What you see, and it's usually around Valentine's Day, are a lot of articles, a lot of advertisements about the dark chocolate and the antioxidants in there. You see articles from cardiologists saying, yeah, it really may help with blood pressure, heart problems. Next slide. So let's talk about this plant itself. What is this? How has it grown? Slide. It's a very tropical plant. It doesn't like to be out of that band between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. It doesn't want to get colder than 65 degrees, and it needs that tremendous rainfall that is in that area. Slide. There are three general categories of chocolate, and it's making kind of a generalization about that because there are many divisions to each one of those. The top one there, the Criollo, is the hardest to grow, but it's used for your very best chocolates. The middle one, the Forastero, doesn't have the same taste to it, but it's more easily grown. A lot of it grown along the coast of West Africa. And then the bottom one is a cross between the two. Tastes a little better, a little bit more disease resistant than the top one. So if you have a large chocolate plantation, you want to know that each tree is going to give you the same kind of chocolate. Most of the trees in those plantations are grafted, so they've got clones of what the original plant was. Slide. It's what's called an understory tree. It likes to be shaded from that hot tropical sun. It also needs that litter, the leaves and the undergrowth there to help it take up nutrients and to protect the roots. Slide. This is what a chocolate, is that rain? Oh boy. That big tree that you see, oops, let's go back one, that you see up over here on the right is what they call a nurse tree. That's not a chocolate tree, it's a different kind of tree. Grows up above those chocolate trees and helps shade them from the tropical sun. Okay, slide. That's what the flower looks like. That's magnified quite a lot. Slide. Slide. And it comes up from little pads on the trunk of the tree, which is very different than we're used to seeing with apple trees or pear trees. Slide. That's what it looks like. So the pods then form along that trunk and the main branches, right on the branches. Slide. Next slide. That's the little insect that pollinates those blooms. It too is very, very small. Slide. So this is what those trees look like as they begin to develop the pods and the pods begin to ripen. Slide. Another slide. And the size of those pods depends on which of those types of chocolate are being grown. Slide. This is the way it's harvested. It's a very labor-intensive, it's manual. Slide. Done carefully so that the tree isn't damaged as the pods are taken off. Slide. Those pods are then collected and slide. They're cut open and all of that inner stuff is scooped out. Slide. Looks like that. And here's where the magic step begins. Slide. That's allowed to ferment. And when it ferments, I don't know if you've had like a compost pile, you know, that gets hot in the middle. That's where those chemicals in the seed start to change. And it changes from that very obnoxious tasting raw seed into more like chocolate as we know it. Next slide. Those seeds are then dried. Slide. And the processing begins, and the steps in that to grate, pulverize them, mix that. Next slide. It takes heavy, let's go one more. Huge granite rollers that are pictured there really took the Industrial Revolution to make the processing of chocolate more feasible. You needed the heavy machinery, you needed the source of energy to work the machinery. Steps in that process to change it from that hard, gritty, nubby stuff to a smooth mixture. Slide. Slide. That can be poured and molded. Slide. And into chocolate bars. Very first chocolate bar, 1874. But the interesting thing is this doesn't taste very good. They finally figured out a way to mold it. But they don't like the way it tastes. So what happened? Slide. Took a couple of Swiss businessmen to figure this out. And once Henry Nestle comes up with condensed milk, which means a lot of the moisture is taken out. And then the second fella thinks, let's add this to the chocolate. They can now mix that together. In the past, to get that milk to mix with the chocolate didn't work. There was too much moisture and there was too much fat in the chocolate. But now they can put it together, slide, and we have chocolate bars. This was the packaging for the very first Hershey's bar. Slide. And through this, in the continuing production of chocolate, the influence of the First World War. Hershey's figured out a way to change the composition of that chocolate bar so it didn't melt and it could be included in field rations. Slide. And several, I guess I should say, chocolate products that we know today. Milky Way was not for the astronomy Milky Way. It was named for a popular milkshake. Snickers bar was named after Hershey's family horse. And M&Ms are the initials of the two men who came up with the idea of creating M&Ms. Next slide. So, chocolate production. It's switched now. We've moved from Central and South America over to the west coast of Africa. And it's the Ivory Coast, next slide, that produces the most chocolate currently, followed by some of those other African, and what is it then? I guess the lower five were back over to the Western Hemisphere. Slide. So who eats all of that chocolate? Slide. Switzerland. Yes, Switzerland. After that, Austria, Germany, all the European countries. We come after Russia. The area of the world where they really don't eat much chocolate is the far eastern companies, China, Japan, and of course your big chocolate companies are thinking, this is where we need to move for new business. And chocolate is big business. Billions and billions of dollars. 2000. Is there a question? 2017, $103 billion worth of sales. The holiday that I guess sells, I can say that Halloween sells, but actually where most of the chocolate is sold is Halloween. Next slide. Hershey's in this country, of course, is the major producer of chocolate. Chocolate's also a secret business. If you figured out the recipe and the process to make M&Ms, you don't want anybody else to have that recipe. You can tour some of these factories, I guess is the word I'm searching for. There are areas that they won't let you into. And on your packaging for chocolate, and I don't know where that package of Dove went. If you look at that, you will notice on the package there is that rainforest logo on there. Yeah. Right here. Shows you that that the company is saying we are producing this in a sustainable way and we're paying for it. We're paying the farmers and the laborers a decent wage. There's been a lot of criticism about the use of child labor for production of chocolate. So if you're sensitive to those things, look for those symbols on your packages of chocolate. Next slide. So there's some thinking that maybe the west coast of Africa is not the best place to produce chocolate. When was that? Several years ago when we had the Ebola outbreak. It was in an area around there. So looking at bringing some of this back to the Western Hemisphere. Next slide. And it actually, for the farmers who grow, work the plantations, this is a more sustainable crop than trying to grow bananas or pineapple. Next slide. We're going to shift gears here and talk about chocolate as a confection for a couple of slides. So there are three different types of chocolate, basically. There's the milk chocolate, which you're probably familiar with. The white chocolate is really nothing more than the fat that has been processed out in the chocolate preparation. And then there's dark chocolate. You can tell from most labels, it's on there what the percent of chocolate is. You'll see a lot of the Lindt bars will have the percent on there, and it changes the taste and the intensity of that chocolate. Next slide. So it's less sweet. It has a stronger taste. I know some people don't particularly care for it, but it does carry the your attention looking at the antioxidants. Next slide. So it's a complex superfood, if you will, and there are all kinds of different things that can be added to it. Slides. If you're tasting the dark chocolate, it's kind of like going to a wine tasting, or if you've done a series of coffee tasting or teas, kind of let that sit in your mouth, melt a little bit so you get the full taste of the chocolate. And they taste different. Cadbury tastes different than Belgian chocolate, than Hershey's chocolate, and people have definite preferences for it. Depends on where it was grown, what's been added to it in the processing. Slide. All kinds of different things that you can add to chocolate. Nuts, berries, herbs. Slide. These are pictures of some of the different chocolate bar wrappers. Everything added to it from chili. The middle one has lavender and blueberry, ginger, coffee and cardamom, fig, fennel, and almonds. So to shift gears again, slide. Let's talk about chocolate in your garden, if you will. What are we talking about here? These are plants that have that sort of dark reddish tone to them, or foliage that carries that, and most of them tend to have chocolate in the cultivar name. Slide. So to take, whoops, let's see, back up here. How you pair those with different kinds of companion plants to capitalize on that color. Slide. So let's take kind of a quick look at some of these. Slide. Number of daylilies. Slide. There's a double. One has the color, one has the name. Next slide. Chocolate dreams. Chocolate cherry dreams. Slide. This is a prairie plant. Has chocolate in the name. It has that kind of purplish tone. This is an annual daisy, hot chocolate, the chocolate mint because of the dark stem to it, hollyhock. This is called Mystic Illusion, but the slides and then the dark center to that yellow surrounding petals. This is a huge plant, Regersea. It's called chocolate wings. This is a tiny bulb. It's called chocolate checkerboard. And this you'll find in most nurseries, chocolate chip, the ajuga. Heucheras. This is one happens to be chocolate ruffles. This, if you look up close, I don't know how it translates from a distance there. It looks like Hershey Kisses are all up and down the stem. It's a digitalis. This is a type of mimosa called summer chocolate. The first year that cultivar came out, they sold out of it. This is a native penstemon from the southwest. It likes a very dry climate called chocolate drop. Another plant called mint chocolate. This is also a native wildflower of the southwest, and it smells like chocolate. They did, I haven't checked recently, they did have several of these plants at the Botanical Garden over toward, I forget what the name of the cross street is, on the far as you come out of the building, over on the left where they had that sensory garden, had plants with different odors to them, scents to them. This is a sedum that's called chocolate drop. And you can see there one of the planting ideas for using these chocolate plants, the contrast to that vine that's behind it, ground cover. Slide. There's a poppy. Slide. This is an orchid that certainly looks like chocolate. It doesn't have chocolate in the name, but it looks like it's been dipped in chocolate. This is a vine. This is a huge vine. Go all the way up the side of the house if you let it, and it has a faint scent of chocolate. This is another plant. Slide. You can find cannas that will also give you that foliage color. How about coleus? There are all kinds of coleus that have chocolate in their name. That's an example of 4 of them. Slide. Slide. Geraniums. This was out, I think, for the first time in nurseries 2 years ago. It's a Calibrachoa. Slide. Delphinium called chocolate. This rose was of interest, and I guess it's maybe 6, 8 years ago when it came out. Different kind of color. This is a Baptisia or false indigo called chocolate chip. This is a Cosmo. Iris, dwarf iris, death by chocolate, bearded iris, chocolate ecstasy. They go on and on. That's a little viola. This I saw in a catalog last spring, brand new. I don't think I've seen it in a nursery anywhere, though. You can also find grasses, carex, and sedges that give you that color. This is very pretty in the fall. Vegetables, how about vegetables? Chocolate. Chocolate cherry tomato. And have you seen this? This is, what do I want to say, accessible. It's out there. A lot of places carry it. It tastes sweeter. This is a very hot habanero pepper, hot chocolate. This I saw in a catalog this spring. It's a new pepper. I think it's a smaller pepper. It's supposed to have a sweet taste to it. And you get popcorn. Next slide. So to shift gears once again here, slide. Talk about how to use these plants if you're going to put them in your garden and take advantage of the contrast in colors. And you can see in this slide there, as you look at that dark color kind of sinks back and the brighter color comes out toward you. So it creates an illusion of depth. Slide. And some slides here just to take a look at how this works in a garden. Slide. We saw that slide before. Next one. The one slide on the left creates a background there. Slide. Show you the contrast here. It makes the color of that plant in front of it. Whoops, we back up. Looking here at both the contrast in the color and the shape of the foliage. Slide. Same thing here. Visual interest that it's. Slide. And you can see as you look at these, for instance, this, your eye, whoops, can we go back one? Your eye kind of picks up on that, the foreground, and then leaps to the back, gives you that depth and that play back and forth as you look at it. Slide. Slide. Next slide. How about this? What do you think about that? A little different. I gave this talk to a garden club in West County, and there was a woman who said, oh my goodness, she said, I love that. I'm going to have to create something like that in my yard. And you can do this with containers. You can do it with succulents. You can do it with herbs. It's a hanging basket, nothing exotic in here, but that makes a very pretty appearance. Most of these need full sun to really give you that deeper color. Slide. So, to go with your chocolate food addiction, you can have chocolate in your garden if you pay attention to some of these plants. Next slide. And at the same time, hopefully remember this whole history, this whole odyssey of chocolate through thousands and thousands of years that people have been eating this. Slide. I like her t-shirt. Did you all see that? Chocolate is a way of life. There you go. Yes. Let's see, was there something back on the previous slide? I can't remember what was. Oh, yes, thank you. So, any questions, comments, thoughts, ideas? Your garden, what do you have in your garden? I have a lot of daylilies. Daylilies. I do. I do have some, yes. Yeah, because they do make an interesting contrast, both if you pay attention to the foliage and to the color, how you match those up to make your appearance, your curb appeal, I guess, if you will. How long did it take you to become a master gardener? You start the training in January, and you have class every Thursday afternoon or Thursday evening for, I think it's 2.5 hours. You go until, I think they had their training celebration finished last week. You have to take some quizzes. This is at the Botanical Garden. It's held in the Kemper Center at the Botanical Garden. Have to take some quizzes, have to learn some botanical names of plants. So if you're working, say, at the Botanical Garden and your supervisor says, go trim such and such, you know where you're going and what you're trimming. So do you work anywhere in a nursery or anything? I volunteer at the Botanical Garden, 2 different capacities. Yesterday morning, we were working out in the gardens around the Kemper Center. As we came through winter, there's some things that have died that needed to be cut back. And things don't stay where you plant them, so they kind of have to be, clipped and. So did you notice this year that you had a lot of things die because of that extreme cold? And it was odd what died and what didn't die. Yeah. Did it come back? Yeah. Some of my bushes, I'm wondering if they're. I think if you haven't seen something happening by now, and if you can snap a twig. It's not good. If it bends and it's still green, give it some more time. Yeah. And it's also odd. You may have 2 pots. Hosta here, hosta there. This hosta's dead. This one's going great guns. Can't explain that. So let's see. The other thing I do every other Tuesday morning is work at the answer service at the Botanical Garden. There's also an answer service with the extension office up in Kirkwood. And then I do the garden talks. Yes, yeah. Yes. Almond spread.
Now, is that to be able to control that spreading? It's just a weed then, basically.
All weeds are
Oh.
I had a small patch in my backyard. Didn't see much of it last year. Guess what? This year it is all over the place. This is just, it's not the chocolate. I can't use what I'm What about weeds? Yeah. You think house calls? So, you ready? Branches? Yeah.
I have several evergreens that are dead on the back side because they don't get the sun. Is there anything that you can do about that? No.
Any other questions? Chocolate? Gardening? Well, thank you, Betsy. Oh, that was so interesting, and I love to hear about all the chocolate cultivars and plants. I'm a gardener, so I appreciate you coming out. And let's give Betsy a big hand. Lunch is being served downstairs, so there's the elevator or the stairs, whatever you prefer. So thanks again.
Thank you. I should have eaten a piece of chocolate. Maybe that would have helped. My hoarseness. Everybody, oh, yeah, that's good. I was afraid I used part of that, I guess it was a month ago, and I thought I'm going to have that whole bag of chocolate. I don't want to eat so much of it.
Is there any difference between, like, the colors, or is this
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
these are the different varieties?
Different